Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Hacktoberfest MLH stream. I'm Swift, the CEO and co-founder of Major League Hacking, and I could not be more excited to be back with you all again today. For those of you who might be just joining us for the first time, we're right in the middle of a really important event for the developer community. It's called Hacktoberfest. It's a month-long festival around all things open source that our friends over at DigitalOcean have been organizing for the last almost 12 years, I want to say. And over the course of the month, more than 150,000 developers around the world learn how to be great open source citizens. They get their hands dirty with the code that literally every developer and business in the world depends on, learn how to make their first contributions, and join this vibrant network of people who are building the infrastructure that is powering the world. And throughout the course of the month, I've been meeting up with some of our partners at Major League Hacking to talk about all things open source, AI, what it means to be a developer in this crazy time where literally things are changing by the minute. I could not be more excited today. I've got our friends from G Research who are going to be talking to us about open source and about all kinds of really cool things around it. I am going to go ahead and bring everybody up on stage right now. We've got three guests with us today. We've got Katarina, we've got Jay, and we've got CID. How's it going, everybody?
Great.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, I'm stoked to have you too. Well, listen, I want to start off by helping everybody get to know you all. I'd love to do some quick intros. And so, who are you? Where do you work? And maybe talk a little bit about your connection or journey to open source. I'd love to get a little bit of background from all of you around, how you came to care about this obviously critical topic we're here to talk about today. Katarina, why don't we start with you, actually?
Great. Thanks, Swift. My path is a non-linear path into open source. I used to be an elementary school teacher. I taught bilingual elementary school for years, but I always was interested in technology, and so I found ways to bring it into my classroom, bring computers in, etc. And then I ended up somehow working in the blockchain world. Again, non-linear path, but check out my LinkedIn if you want to try to understand it. And blockchain is all started out all open source, and so I was doing a lot of community and education around that, and I started to understand more of the importance of open source and how it really was the underpinning for all the technology that we use. So when I was recruited to come and work with the open source team here with G Research, I was pretty excited about it, and so in this process, I've gotten deeper into understanding platform and machine learning and all of those tools as well. So now my work is developer relations and engineering experience, I like to call it, because it's all about supporting the people that are contributing the open source code. And that's a short version of my journey into the role that I have now.
That's amazing. Well, I mean, thinking about that experience, I'm sure we'll get into that, but that is so critically important and honestly undervalued, I think, by a lot of companies. Could you tell us a little bit about what G Research is for those who might not be familiar with the organization?
G Research is a quantitative research firm. They spend a lot of time trying to predict markets, financial markets, so it's a fintech generally, but with a focus on the technology and the research underneath all of that. And we're really fortunate that G Research recognizes the role that open source software plays in all the tools that they use. So G Research has an open source program office, which is what we do here. And it's a group of primarily software engineers that work in the areas that I mentioned. So cloud infrastructure, machine learning, AI, and security, and we have a DevOps team as well. So it's a pretty, our boss likes to call it a MOSPO, a muscular OSPO. It's a pretty engineering-driven open source program office, which reflects some of the work that G Research does as well.
Wow, I love that. I feel like you've got all the good lingo and buzzwords here for us to talk about. I'm excited to dig in way more on that stuff. Before we go too deep, though, Jay, why don't you introduce yourself next?
So it's interesting. Katarina was saying her story is a little bit around the bend. Mine flows straight through open source. I'm Jay Faulkner. If you know me, it's probably from my work on OpenStack, which I've been working on since 2014. But that's definitely not my first introduction to open source. I actually was a college dropout. I went to NC State University before I was responsible enough to wake up and go to class on time on my own, quite frankly, and ended up bouncing around a lot of retail jobs and stuff, and eventually it was the fact that the open source softwares existed. I ran a website at the time, oldos.org. It still exists, which got 1 million plus hits a month. And using open source technologies, I taught myself how to run that entire thing in a 32 megabyte of RAM virtual private server that had been donated to the website. And that's kind of my open source university. And I remember, at the time thinking about, this is the same stuff that's being used at Yahoo. This is the same stuff that's being used at all of these other big places. And I have access to it and to learn it. And that knowledge is what eventually was my foot in the door to become a system administrator. And then, several years down the road, like I said, now I've been a technical committee chair for OpenStack. I've helped run the OpenStack project for years and years. And I actually just recently, within the last year, became a Gentoo developer working on Gentoo Linux. And obviously, just like Katerina, for the last 3.5 years, I've been working at G Research Open Source Software, which it really is hard to overstate how much they get it in terms of open source taking, you sometimes need non-directed effort to make things better, to make them maintainable, to make them secure, to keep them running. It's not always about what the next feature is. Sometimes it's about keeping the motors running. And this is one of the first jobs in the open source community I had where that was a top line part of my job description instead of something I was trying to beg, borrow, or steal time from.
That's awesome. Was that intentional? Did you, like, when you were looking for your current role, was like the connection to open source like a main driver?
Oh, it was the only driver. I actually worked in the same office with one of our senior leaders, Alex Scammon, when I worked at Rackspace in San Francisco, and he acted as a mentor for me through a little bit of tough times I was having there. And later on, when he heard I was potentially looking for work, he called me up and sold me on the concept. And it didn't take much, quite frankly. I think everyone who has spent the majority of their career working on open source software, whether it be operating it, contributing on the periphery or contributing to it full time, the idea of getting a full-time position where your job is to make that piece of software better, to promote it, to help people understand what's going on, it really is dream job territory.
Yeah.
Maybe just under perpetual lottery winner as best possible job someone could have. So.
Well, I haven't seen many of those openings for perpetual lottery winner, but I see when I will definitely apply, though. I think I'm interested in that career path. But I think there's something really interesting about this idea of working in public, especially in this age right now in AI. And I think that open source is just this really incredible vehicle where you just get to see somebody's work firsthand. And honestly, you might even use it, right? Like, I think about how powerful it is to go to an employer and be like, yeah, not only can you see all of my work, but you're using it in production already. It's almost like I'm a developer at your company before you even, hired me to do it, which is pretty cool. And in fact, CID, I know you have a pretty unique journey here as well, but I'd love for you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey into open source.
Yeah, sure. So I go by CID. I'm a software engineer and an MLH alumnus. I am a contributor and maintainer with the G Research Open Source Software and the OpenStack Ironic project. My introduction to open source, mine is much recent, and I was introduced during my MLH fellowship. Yeah, so I got to make my first ever contribution to an open source project during MLH, and that also happens to be OpenStack, and I'm still working there to today.
That's amazing. Well, I'm going to ask you about the fellowship and about a couple of other things in your journey, but I want to come back to Jay really quickly to talk about OpenStack. Yeah. It seems like that's an important background here for some of this narrative. Can you tell the audience what is OpenStack and why does it matter in the open source world?
So OpenStack, sort of the moniker for a long time was that it's the open source cloud operating system, and that's a good way of thinking about it. A lot of times when people think about cloud, there's even like that pithy statement say the cloud is someone else's computer. Well, that doesn't have to be true, right? That might be true if you're using AWS or Azure or commercial cloud, but OpenStack is a suite of open source tools that lets you sort of build up that platform on your own. And so what we see is that there are a lot of companies like G Research using it for high scale internally and bespoke hardware, all the way to, a lot of the folks I spoke with this weekend in Paris, who are European countries who are concerned about digital sovereignty and wanting to run their own things in their own jurisdiction for safety. And OpenStack has been enabling that. We actually celebrated our 15-year anniversary this year. So it's been around a really long time. Over 110,000 individual contributors over the course of that time. We usually end up with 500 to 600 unique ones each release. So it really is open source software operating at scale. And I know a lot of folks might hear about Kubernetes or CNCF or what the next is, but OpenStack is one of those pieces of software that tends to operate in the background of all of this. If you've looked at a Kubernetes cluster and you've wondered, I wonder how they got that stood up, you flip a coin. Heads, it probably use OpenStack somewhere in that stack.
Wow. Okay. I knew it was a big and important project in the ecosystem. I've been familiar with OpenStack because, MLH has operated in the periphery of helping to support it for a while now. But I did not have any idea about how long it had been around and the volume of contributions y'all are getting. Like, that is pretty incredible. I'm going to come back to you in a few minutes, Jay, to talk about your journey into, being a maintainer and, what that looks like. But CID, I want to flip back over to you. So, for those who might not be familiar with it, the MLH Fellowship is this thing that Major League Hacking started back in 2020. Actually, G Research has been a partner in the fellowship since basically the very beginning, which is so cool. But, if you remember back to that time, literally around the world, I think there were 40,000 MLH community members that had jobs or internships they were counting on rescinded due to COVID. So that's not even people who didn't get one. They had one and then it got taken away because of the environment. And so we teamed up with a bunch of partners who were thought leaders in this space around open source, like G Research, to come up with an alternative, work on open source software in public for 12 weeks rather than for a single company, do it in an environment that mirrors the remote software engineering team that you're going to end up on when you go to your career. Things with pair programming and code reviews and access to amazing maintainers and mentors from the organizations that were funding all of the work. And CID, as we heard, was one of our fellows and alumni. So CID, let's start from the entry point to the fellowship. Like, I assume you'd heard of open source before and thought about contributing. It sounds like you made your first major contributions to the fellowship, but like, how did you come to be aware of the fellowship? What was your motivation for applying? And we'll start there. And then I've got some questions for you about OpenStack and things as well.
Yeah. So I think it started from Twitter. I'm always on Twitter, so I see, and a lot of MLH fellows, they document their from application to the progression of the fellowship until they eventually make out something out of it, maybe land a job, maybe start their own company. So I think that was the first inspiration, and that drove me to apply the first time. My first application was in 2023, and I got rejected. So I went back and got prepared a little more. And in 2024, I applied the second time, and my application got accepted. And it was kind of the launch pad to my professional tech career, so to speak. Yeah, so I think it was mostly from the feedback I got from people that were already in the fellowship and the positive experiences they shared in public that drew my attention to it. And up to that point, I've never had any contributions to an open source software. And that's not because I've never thought about it, but open source is one of those things. I think it could be a little intimidating to make a PR and just push out. And sometimes also the turnaround time for maintainers to review your code. There's just a lot of moving parts to it. And that motivation is not usually always there. And sometimes you don't even know what to contribute to in the first place. So all those factors, I think, counted into the fact that I hadn't made any contributions until MLH. And also, I think priority, because once you're done with maybe a boot camp or a CS degree, you're mostly looking for a job or something like. And people do not just think about open source and think this could become a career or any sort of rewarding. Yeah. So I think that was the journey.
Wow. I mean, that's first of all, incredible that you were able to do that. And I think seeing how far you've come is just such an accomplishment. Had
Yeah,
you
thank
heard about G Research or OpenStack before the fellowship as well? Like, were those also new for you?
you. Those were new. Those were all new to me. I remember the first time I heard bare metal. At the point I heard bare metal, I think that was the first time I was hearing that word, and I I remember googling what bare metal means. I got to see it's this machine that has no OS on it, and yeah, so that was how new I was to the entire concept of OpenStack. And yeah, and how I got to G Research was G Research obviously sponsored the cohort of the Spring 2024 cohort, and I got to contribute to the OpenStack Ironic project, and I was retained. Yeah, so I continued contribution and eventually become a maintainer. Yeah, but before that point, I didn't know anything about OpenStack. And OpenStack, quite frankly, is not one of the projects you might discover on your own as an individual too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's very, very impressive that you're able to do that.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about making that first set of contributions and right and like that journey as a beginner in open source, because so many people as part of Hacktoberfest, right? Like there's 150,000 people this month who are literally just getting started on their journey to being great open
Yeah.
source citizens. Like, what was that like for you, and what advice do you have for them?
Yeah, so I think the story is going to be different for different people. But in my case, I think the process was I I I had the advantage of joining a community that was very inviting, and they were very helpful because I had a lot of questions. And because if you think about someone that did not know what a Beneto is, and Ironic is basically all about Beneto provisioning. So I had a lot of questions, and people like Jay and the entire OpenStack community, they always had answers for me. So I think if you are making your first contributions or you're considering it, I think you're already good enough. That imposter syndrome will always be there, but you have to look beyond that. And um, I think the steps I would advise anybody to take is try to find where the community hang out, try to get in with that community, try to get a feel for before even making your first PRs. Once you do that, then you could review the contributing guide and the documentation, because that will make your PR get much more positive feedback, and it will also make the work of the maintainer much easier to review. Yeah, once you do that, I think just then look at the code base and find what the established pattern and the structure of the code is, so that you not push a PR that's entirely different. So if you follow this process, and if it's a small project, not a project like OpenStack, you could run it on your local machine. So you can also run it and get a feel of what it's just like. Just get acquainted with the project first, and then you can make your PR, and you increase the odds of getting your PRs merged and a good first experience.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Katerina, I'd actually love to turn to you next. Obviously, we heard just now that G Research and MLH have been working together on the fellowship and helping to, create this pipeline of, maintainers now who are doing awesome stuff to support literally all these companies. Can you talk about like the reason that G Research like cares about this? Like, why are y'all partnering with MLH, and how does that fit into the overall like way you think about open source in the world?
Well, you've touched on it a little bit, which is that a lot of people don't think about open source as a career option. And also the fact that a lot of these tools continue to need folks coming in and learning about them and becoming maintainers and contributing. And Jay and I have had this conversation quite a bit, especially around OpenStack, because it's an older project, and there are a bunch of barriers to entry with OpenStack as well, with contributing to OpenStack. And so how do we create a pipeline of people continuing to come in and step in? Some of the original maintainers for some of these projects, they're just like, they're older, and they might be aging out of work. They might be retiring at some point, or they maybe have other, things coming up and taking up some of their energy. So how do we continue to build this pipeline of folks that will continue to contribute to open source projects in general? And MLH was an opportunity. It was sort of this, fellowship internship, but without being too much of a fangirl here, you all do a really good job of curating the kinds of folks that come in and work and become fellows. So we already, we worked with you in the beginning to get a sense of what G Research or what Gross needed specifically. Gross is G Research open source software. So the kinds of needs that we had, we did have to, work with you a little bit to clarify that. But since then, you've gotten really, really good at it. And it's that has been one of the great advantages, is knowing that the quality of the fellows that we're going to be getting are already really high, and that we've gotten better at describing what our requirements are and what that ramp up and onboarding would look like. So the process is a lot smoother now. And so we also just know that we're going to get a good fellow, and we're going to be able to train them on the kinds of needs that we have really quickly, and they're going to be contributing within a few weeks, which is pretty impressive. And then from that program, there's a likelihood that we'll be able to bring them on to continue to contribute to these open source projects. And if they don't necessarily do it with us, we know that they have an interest now, or they've been introduced to the larger open source ecosystem. And that's just good for all open source projects and all of technology, if I'm going to be frank about it.
Yeah, oh, I totally get that. And I get the sense that CID might not be the only person that y'all are continuing to work with post-fellowship. Are there others as well?
Yes. Let's see. Mehdi, Nassim Koja works with us. Juan Escalada works with us. Sidipto Baral works with us. We had one fellow who actually got hired and now works in an office in Dallas. I think there's more. Jay, do you?
Yeah, I mean, there's even another MLH graduate on our team, Adam MacArthur,
yes,
who has focused a lot on improving Ironic support in the Go SDKs.
That's awesome. Wow.
Yeah.
I mean,
Mohammed. The other thing, sorry, I'll have to come up and mention. By the way, this is my squeezy ball here. When I have great ideas, the other component of it is that a lot of the fellows have come globally. So they've come from all different parts of the world, which is another very important component of continuing to support the open source ecosystem, is not centralizing them, but making sure there's folks in all these different countries with all these different backgrounds and interests who can bring different kinds of ideas into the work that they do.
Oh, yeah, so important, right? Like, I will not bore the audience with this story at length, but like, I came from a state school that was not known for technology at all. And I learned very quickly, spending time with people in my community, that, talent is globally distributed and opportunity is not. And, you need to go out all around the world into every community to find these amazing people who can really make a huge impact. And I think that's something MLH has done a really great job at. We talk a lot about the size of our audience, and in the US we're reaching, let's call it 1 in 3 computer science grads each year through one of our programs, which is obviously very cool and amazing. But another stat that we don't talk about enough, I don't think, is this past month, according to our most recent census, we have MLH chapters and community members in 98 countries around the world right now. Wow. I think we might break 100 by the end of the year. I'm knocking some wood right now to bring me some good luck, but and it truly is a global community. And I think that's something I'm deeply proud of with our work that we do together between MLH and G Research, is democratizing access to these types of things. Because you're right, open source is not siloed in one specific geography. It is truly a global phenomenon and requires everybody to help contribute and drive it.
Absolutely.
Can you talk a little bit about your experience thinking about, I'm sorry, remember how you called it engineering experience? I want to hear a little bit about like how you think. So, obviously we're talking about getting people into open source, helping optimize their experiences, things like that. But like, how do you think about making it easy for contributors and developers to like work within an open source ecosystem?
Sure. There's so I've came from more of a community background when I stepped into this role, and then that sort of evolved into developer relations. It's a lot of coaching of software developers. It's a lot of helping them, reconsider how to interact with their various contributors. Within the developer world, it's sometimes hard, especially if you're a small open source project, to get eyes on it. But if those eyes are feel like criticisms, or feel like, people are suggesting features and you didn't want those features, or people are, making contributions, but they didn't read the contributor guide. Like you've got to find ways to really interact with the people that are contributing in ways that are inviting and encouraging. And within that, it is about documentation. It is about perspective. It's about some of the, how you've built, like how you've built your tools, how you've written your code, and is it easily parsable? Are there good security checks on it? So there's all these parts of making a good open source project, and it's more than just writing the code. And so what I can help with is remembering all of those, and then finding tools. Maybe part of it is just letting people know about the project, and then that means a website necessarily, or a community like a Discord, or it is making a presentation at a conference, right? There's all these parts to it. And sometimes it's finding new maintainers, and then that's, going to schools or doing hackathons. There's like all these other parts to it that I'm starting to call, it's sort of developer relations, but there's an engineering component too when we think about the, operations underneath all of this. So that's why I'm playing around with this term of engineering experience. EngX, it looks cool, right?
EngX.
So
I really like it. It's good branding. It's really good branding. Yeah, and you haven't mentioned this yet, so I don't know if this is even a thing for you, or if it's something that you're still actively considering. But how has AI changed that, the landscape of this engineering experience stuff, and especially in the context of open source? Like, that's a huge topic among MLH's community. Is like, how do I navigate this new world that's unfolding in front of me by the minute? But I'm curious if you've put any thought into that, or have any
Yeah, I'll answer it partially, and then I'll pass it on to Jay, because I think he's got some special perspectives on this too. And I'll just say, at some level, it's things like tools to help make documentation easier, or to make any of your public faces easier. Making videos, or making any kind of visual assets for your tools. Like AI can help with all of that. It's also, there's more coming, education around it. So people that want to learn, do deep dives, they have this sort of coach, this built-in coach that can help guide or build a curriculum for them. There's a lot of tools there. But then around the code, I'm going to let Jay answer that.
Yes, Jay, please tell us, give us the goods here. This is the topic of the month for sure.
Yeah, I mean, I would say I'm kind of going to start it with a little bit of cold water, because you do have to be careful, because every project has different AI contribution policies, and the two that I care the most about have pretty much diametrically opposed policies. If you were a person who wanted to contribute to Gentoo Linux, you're not allowed to use learning language models on that project as a matter of policy. It's a choice that they've made, and a lot of projects will have an AI policy. Open Infra Foundation, who are sort of the bosses who get to hire all the lawyers for OpenStack and Kata containers and that sort of family of projects, has a policy that's pretty liberal. So the first thing I would say is, just make sure you go consume those engineering experience resources that Katarina's talked about. Look at the policy, make sure that it's something that's okay. The other piece there is that the tools are extremely capable, but a lot of the focus we have on it from like social media and things like that are thinking about how to rush to the destination, how to get to the end point. But especially in the early days, when you're a more junior person, when you're first engaging a project, the process matters a lot. How you get there, how you learn as you go. And so I would encourage folks to use these tools as learning mechanisms as much as trying to develop something. But to me, the cardinal rule of all of it is, regardless of whatever any policy says, if you push code to an open source repository, you're staking your reputation on it. And if you're a new contributor, you don't have a lot of reputation to stake yet. And so you should make sure that you fully understood what's going on, that you're not necessarily trusting everything, that you're using your own brain, checking the citations, making sure it all fits. And with all those caveats in place, it's a major force multiplier if you can get through that. But you do definitely have to be very careful, because even as someone who's worked on OpenStack for a really long time, I've had it tell me things that misled me and sent me down a path. And so I just kind of encourage people to think of it as a learning tool, especially early on in your career, more so as just a productivity booster, because it can open up those doors to helping you learn and understand things. You know, make it walk through the code, tell you where things are, and treating it that way is a very fun way to do it. And I mean, I'll say that from an OpenStack perspective, we actually had a session at the summit about it, and we're seeing usage of that go up. So you shouldn't be shy about using those tools or about admitting to using those tools, as long as you make sure that you can fully back up the things that you push with your own knowledge and your own learnings. And if those knowledge and learnings are wrong, that's perfectly fine. Take the code review feedback, learn the next thing, because that's what's really going to set you apart as a junior engineer from the AI. The AI doesn't learn. I can give code review feedback to Claude Code all day long, and it's going to make the same mistake in the future. But, you know, when I'm working with talented folks like CID, you know, I give him a piece of feedback and it never shows up again. And that to me is sort of what I look for when I'm trying to figure out, I'm kind of like what new maintainers are maybe worth more of my time than others in doing is how much ownership they take, how much they internalize that feedback and put it to good use.
Yeah. I mean, this is something that has been so near and dear to my heart at MLH for years, because I tell people all the time that the soft skills you develop at hackathons can be even more important than the hard skills in some ways, because those are the things that are going to lay the foundation for your technical and personal growth over the rest of your career, right? And so, yeah, that ability to take feedback. You know, you said something really interesting, though, with that. I need to update my own AI talking points for this one a little bit, but I've been talking a lot about this paradigm shift in industry from everybody starting their career as an individual contributor and a select few of us, you know, graduating to managers who help other individual contributors succeed, to the new paradigm with AI, which is that every one of us starts our career as a manager now. The difference is, instead of managing people, we're managing machines that are highly forgetful, employees and whatnot. But the thing that you said that really, you know, I think I need some updating on is treating the AI like a thought partner. And I think that that's a really interesting thing that a lot of people, we could talk more about as a community, right? Because I do think that they're really useful creativity tools. And there is a lot of creativity in development as well, right? Like, I think people think about it as very binary. Like, I'm writing code, it's like math, right? But there's a lot of nuance and creativity in code for sure as well, right?
I always say that all software is interpersonal at the end of the day, because there's a person, or, you know, a company with a person inside it that has a problem that you're trying to solve. And you as the human are always going to be the best way of translating that into the right thing, of figuring out how to take someone's real world human problem and turn it into a technical problem. And then the AI can help you solve those technical problems. But that human connection, that soft skill usage at the beginning to level set and to figure out what's really going on is very important, because I think anyone who's even been IT for their own family has had that experience where the complaint doesn't really line up with what's going on, that you've got to ask a few questions to see what the real problem is. And that to me is one of the best things about having the human in the loop still.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Jay, I want to come back to you, ask you some questions in a second about being a maintainer on some of these large projects. But CID, are you using AI as part of your development workflow, especially around open source? Can you talk to us a little bit about your experience with these new technologies?
Of course. I mean, I do use AI on a day-to-day. But it's mostly for research purposes, because I also understand the fact that an experienced contributor, an experienced developer, and engineer can use AI all they want, because they already have that foundations locked in. They already know what, like, every moving part of every part of the project. But for a budding talent like myself, I try to balance it out to make sure that I'm also learning while also, tripling my efforts, like using AI as a effort multiplier, so to speak. Yeah, so, but I do use AI almost every day for one thing or the other in my workflow, preparing PRs, researching bugs, and triaging them, and asking questions, understanding code more in depth. Because one thing about AI that I've got to like the most is its information on demand I think it's even faster than Google, and you don't need to structure it a particular way to just take what you have and it will give you pretty meaningful um, explanation when you need some. But it can also, I think it's also as good as yourself. The AI can only be as good as the person prompting. Yeah.
I say that a lot. When you think about what these technologies are, effectively they're prediction engines, right? Like we take a character or word and we predict the most likely next character or word to appear. And, naturally those things kind of gravitate towards the types of answers that we're looking for. But implicitly, that is a system of averages, right? Like we're taking a huge corpus of information and getting the most likely output. When you develop domain expertise, so you become a competent, coder, or maybe you're a fine artist, or like whatever your domain discipline is, the specific keywords or questions or ways to frame things that get you a likely answer with a higher quality or a more tasteful response based on those words. I also think that your point that you're making about you like explicitly using it as a learning tool while you're still developing your domain expertise is really interesting. How do you avoid that pitfall where I feel like the natural gravity here is like, tell the AI to like, we've got the bug report, AI go solve this. Like, how are you intentionally using AI to further your learning? Like, do you have specific strategies you're employing right now?
Okay, so Jay will always tell me that reliability is better than speed. So it's better to be reliable than fast. And also, if you notice, the AI will always echo whatever you want it. So it's always agreeing with you, saying absolutely. So you just have to understand that. I mean, almost 70% of the time, it's not telling you facts. And with a project like OpenStack, where you're pushing code to an upstream repository where a lot of people get to see it, not just today, but more years to come. And just as Jay mentioned, your reputation is at stake. And someone like me, you do not have a lot of that to stake. So you just balancing, mostly using it for research, and you don't just take its word for it. You get some information, you get some deep dive, you get more information, because most of the time the first garbage or the first output will be garbage, or just be some echo room stuff that you just want to hear. And yeah, so balancing it, I I still use Google, I still use Stack Overflow, I still use all the olden days, so to speak, tools for research these days. So I still use Google, because AI most of the time, uh, at some point, it just gets to a ceiling. It doesn't matter the amount of prompting you do or how good the prompts get. It just does not get any better result or response than that. So at that point, that's the limit, and you have to get information the old way. And so just um, the more you use it, you get to know that there are things that these things actually good at, like quick informational stuff that you can verify. And I also understand that AI, at least the AI we have today, is not nowhere close replacing um, the community or people more experienced than you. So you also need to understand when to ask a human, or when to throw that question in the RSC, or wait for a one-on-one to ask the questions, than depend on AI, which will give you false hope or false information. So yeah, that's how I try to balance things and make sure that I'm learning while contributing to with AI.
I mean, I think that's great. I really do. And I think that we don't have enough good examples for developers to look up to around how to use these technologies yet. Like a lot of what they hear is the media hype bubble around how Claude Code is replacing developers or whatever. And they go on streams and they see these people who are making these vibe coded apps and whatnot. And they're like, those are the examples that we're putting out in the world right now. But like, I think a thoughtful and intentional way of using AI, like what you're describing, is actually the model that we should be pushing developers towards, right? Like thinking about it as a partner, understanding it's a tool, understanding how it gives you leverage. Like that all makes a ton of sense to me. I do want to transition back to talking about Jay's kind of unique experience as a maintainer on two really incredibly like large, far-reaching projects. We spent a lot of time on the streams I've done this month talking about the opportunities for contributors and how to get started. But like, you have a lot of purview into maintainers and how they should be thinking. Can you just talk a little bit about like what it's actually like to be a maintainer on the other side, and like what advice you have for them, especially in a month like Hacktoberfest?
So I want to be careful about, like, technically I'm a Gentoo developer. I don't necessarily feel like maintainer because that is a project that has a lot of developers. There's a lot of people who are pushing huge amounts of code. I maintain a couple of packages, so I'm a little bit of a tag along there. But to me, what's brought success as maintainership from the OpenStack standpoint is doing code review, and it does come back to that learning loop. And code review kind of has a unique property in that you can help other people and yourself very much at the same time. That when you review someone else's code, you're reading what they've written. You're learning more about parts of the code base that maybe you wouldn't have written about yourself. You're seeing their approach to problems, and especially if you've only worked in one specific type of project, maybe you've only worked front end, you haven't worked a lot of back end, and you go review a patch from someone who has that back end experience, they might have a different approach to that problem than you do. And by reading that, you can learn it. And plus, code review is one of the best places that you can ask questions. And I'm gonna call back to something that CID said earlier, which we don't have everything figured out. I've been working on OpenStack for 12, 13 years, something like that. And I had a conversation with someone today where for the first time, not today, but 2 days ago, where I finally identified what all of these project names in OpenStack did, because I didn't know, because there's too much for one person to know. And that's why it's about building up that feedback loop of learning and being able to figure out how to gather information, because it's not like the Ironic I first started working on in like 2013, 2014 is the same as the Ironic is today. And the only way to keep that knowledge up is by reading the code, is by staying up to date, is by joining the community places, like was said by CID. And that's, I don't really know if I would say like there's some massive experience. I mean, from my perspective, OpenStack is almost like the small town I live in, right? Like, I went and got to have dinner with the people who I've been working with for 8-10 years, even though there have been different company names on the paycheck. We're talking the same people. And that's always the open source that I tend to gravitate to, are those that are very community oriented. For referencing back to Gentoo, when I was that kid who had flunked out of college and didn't know what was up, installing Gentoo taught me a lot about Linux. People who were my age being patient with me, asking stupid questions as a teenager about this thing that I didn't know about anymore. Those are the same people who were opening the doors for me then. And I always try to keep that as front of mind as possible when I'm a maintainer, to open those doors for other people, because, one day I'm not going to be around to help make the stuff go anymore, but I know that CID will, for instance. And that's really fulfilling to me. And I think one of the kind of most invisible parts of being a long-term maintainer that people don't think about is making sure that you've got the red carpet rolled out for the new folks who need to come in and learn and become maintainers themselves.
Yeah, investing in that next generation. It's so powerful, and it's literally what MLH was founded on, 12 years ago. So I really believe that. Well, we are about to wrap up on time here. I'd love to just do some closing thoughts. We'll just go around the room, maybe starting with Katerina. And are there any things that you want to say in closing, or resources you want to point people to if they want to learn more about G Research or any of the open source work we've talked about today?
Again, MLH fangirl right here. Definitely get involved with MLH however you can, hackathons, the fellowships. For G Research, we have a website. It is G Research, research.com. And then within that, one of the teams is the GR open source team. The company itself is based in London. Always looking for new hires in London, but the open source team itself is global and remote. We have an open source project called Armada. That website is armada.io. The website is in progress, but update is in progress. But we could always use contributors, and we do have first good issues tagged, but our documentation always needs more help. And that's about it. I look forward to meeting our future MLH fellows and figuring out how we can support their open source journeys.
Heck yes. What about you, Jay?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm active in OpenStack Gentoo communities, among others. If you see JAYF, it's me. Say hello. I'll try to point my helpfulness in your direction. The other thing that I get to do as part of my job, which is really great and sort of gets to what I was talking about earlier, is we have a podcast that we call the Gross Out Podcast. It's the G Research Open Source Software Outreach Podcast, but I call it the Gross Out Podcast because I know at least I did before I got really involved, and it had this impression of these folks having it all figured out, and what do I got to do to figure out what's the trick? And there is no trick. It's all sometimes it's a slog, sometimes it's a rough. Even if you've been involved for a long time, there's going to be those moments, and so that the podcast, we always try to focus on that by asking a guest, a struggle they had, how they overcame it, and other than that, I try to make it like every conversation I would have with someone at a conference or something. So if you enjoyed this little bit of banter back and forth, it might be a good thing for you to go have a look at. You can search for GR-OSS in your favorite podcast app, or go to podcast.gr-oss.io and just click the button for whatever you use to manage your podcast. Alternatively, if you want to see it in video form, as well as watch some of our videos that we posted about various technical things in OpenStack with a focus on Ironic, you can go check us out on YouTube at youtube.com/@OSS-GR.
That's awesome. Well, we do have to wrap up here. I want to say thank you to all three of you for joining me. This was a fun and fascinating conversation. We are so grateful to be partnered up with G Research and to be able to support amazing developers like CID. Super cool to hear about your journey and to see you here on stream with us talking about all this stuff. Wow, like what an incredible story. But yeah, thank you all, everybody, all of you. This was great. For everybody tuning in, happy Hacktoberfest. We're all wishing you the best of luck with your contributions and can't wait to see what you go on to do next. So thank you, everybody. Happy hacking.
Thank you.